everyone, I am Sneha, co-founder and CEO DevCompass, and I am, as always, super thrilled to have you guys back. And we have reached the video 3 of stage 4. This is all about Claude code, markdown files, how do you keep the configuration lean as your project grows for your entire team, and so much more. For everyone else who has no context of why we're doing this and what is it that we're learning, please head over to DevCompass.ai and you will get all the relevant information. Let's get started. So the last video covered CLAUDE.md file, the file that gives every team member the same Claude. This video is about the 3 tools that let you keep that configuration lean as your project grows. Path-specific rules, so conventions stay super scoped to where they apply. Skills, so you can define reusable task workflows once and invoke them by name. Sounds tough. And context, which is fork, the mechanism that lets Claude start a focused subsession without dragging the entire project context along. These 3 together are how you avoid the trap of a CLAUDE.md that becomes a 400-line document that nobody ever reads. So let's look into it. Okay, fine. So specific rules are exactly what they sound like. Okay, rules that only apply when Claude code is working in a specific directory. That is why path specific. So let's look at the folder tree on the left. 3 directories, each with their own CLAUDE.md file, each connected by a line to its rule card on the right. Okay, first is the API directory. All API routes must include request validation middleware. Return 422 for validation errors, not 400. Label applies only in the /API, which is the API subdirectory. That's not a rule for the front end. It only matters in the API directory. So it lives in /API/Claude.md, not in the root directory. Second, the test directory. So use describe /it blocks, mock only external services, never mock internal modules. So it only applies in /test. These rules only apply when Claude is writing or modifying test files. They would be literally noise anywhere else. Third is the scripts directory. Every script must include a dry run mode, run with a -- dry run first, confirm before destructive actions. So it only applies in /scripts. These are the operational scripts that might touch the database, so it is super critical here but irrelevant in the front end. So scope rules to where they apply, keep the roots super lean. That is the principle of writing a good markdown file which has limited scope, which has a very catered scope, instead of everything being dumped into the main root markdown file. If you put all of these in the root Claude.md, it creates a document so long that Claude starts treating the early sections as background noise, because we know that it only has enough context to remember all of it. If you don't, then you need to look at context window, lost in the middle problem, and all of these videos to get an idea on it. Let's move ahead. Okay, so we did talk about how we are scoping the path specific rules. Now we will talk about skills. So skills are reusable task definitions. Instead of typing out a long specific task every time, you define it once and invoke it by name. How simple, okay? So step 1, define the skill. You write a markdown file in .claude/skills. The example is, let's say, review PR, okay? It lists what to check. Test coverage on changed functions, missing error handling on new API routes, API contract changes. It specifies the output format, structured review comment, file by file findings, suggested changes. And then if you look at the last line of that contact block, which is allowed tools read and glob. Again, we have not discussed about this, but This is a scope constraint. This skill can only use read and glob. It can't run the other skills. So it clearly specified that allowed tools, etc. is a skill definition. Okay. The second part is invoke the skill. One command in the terminal, which is CLAUDE skill review PR. So it will read the skill definition and execute it with the current context. Every developer who invokes this skill gets the same review process, not their personal idea of what a review should cover, but a very team defined standards. Okay. So you need to remember that skills encode process knowledge, not just preferences. So that is a distinction. A skill cannot be personal. It's the team's agreed standard for how a task should be done. Okay. Now, two of the topics are discussed: path specific markdown files and skills, and now we will look at context. Fork, which is the third tool, and it's one of the most specific to managing long sessions. Okay, so a long CLAUDE session without context is like you've been working for hours. The context is full of work history, file reads, changes made, analysis done. Now you need to do one focused subtask. Write a new integration test for a single function. If you do it in the main session, the test writing task is surrounded by all that noise. Okay, so the test quality degrades as the context fills. So what we will do, the context here is fork. So it lets you start a focused targeted session that inherits only the relevant context from the main session. Just the function that you're testing, just the relevant conventions without dragging along the full history. The forked session does the focused task with a clean, tight context. When it's done, the main session was unaffected. So it is the same principle as scratchpad files, which will be covered later in stage 5, but you have to keep the context lean and purposeful. This is what we have been emphasizing since the start. And yeah, I think that's all that you need. Just keep the context lean and just know that when should you start or create a forked session. And we've already discussed this, that when do you resume a session, when do you fork a session, when do you start afresh. So if you don't remember or you can't recall that context, please go over and watch those previous videos, and this will be super easy for you to grasp. Now, okay, so let me show you what a skill looks like for a specific scenario, how we actually did it for the previous context as well, where we were looking at either path specific scenarios or context scenarios. So now the skill file is at .claude /skills/ review.pr, because we are looking at a review PR skill. Okay. The checklist has 3 items specific to this code base. Test coverage on changed tool handlers, not just any functions. The tool handler specifically, which is missing error handling on API routes, the category and retriable pattern from stage 2, and API contract changes, which is flagged as breaking versus non-breaking. The output section is very specific, just as specific: a structured review comment, file by file findings with line numbers for any tool handler changes. Use the structured error format. It must be preserved. That last requirement only makes sense if you have actually done stage 2. It would be literally a noise in a generic review skill. So if you look at the allowed tool sections now, read and glob. So read to open individual files, glob to find the changed files by pattern. So there is no write allowed, no bash allowed, and we will look at these allowed tools here, but it doesn't run the test, it checks coverage. It is very precisely scoped. And how do you invoke it? So CLAUDE skill review PR, we discussed it in how do we actually declare a skill. So one command, and every developer on the team runs the same review. The walkthrough is going to ask you and to like literally build this file. the walkthrough will ask you to build this file, so you have to keep this in mind. Now, yeah, so this was all about the current video, path specific rules to like scope conventions, to where they apply, keep root lean, what are skills, how do we define reusable task workflows once, how do we invoke by name, team standard process, and where do we exactly use the context fork so that you can have a very focused sub session with a targeted context instead of the main, like putting everything in the main session. How do you make it like remain unaffected? Now the next video is going to be about those built-in tools which I have kinda mentioned in this session, which is read, write, glob, etc. So we will see what are these built-in tools and when to use each of it. So I will see you in the next video. Please do your assignments.